Welcome to Eternal Darkness, where nightmares come to life. I'll be your host through these twisted tales tonight. Before we descend into the shadows, remember to like and subscribe to join our growing community of horror enthusiasts. Get comfortable, turn down the lights, and prepare yourself as we begin our journey into the unknown. Summer of 2018 hit with that particular kind of heat that made everything shimmer in the distance, and I found myself craving solitude in the worst way. After 3 months of working double shifts at the warehouse, dealing with broken machinery and irritable coworker, I needed to get away from everything. My friend Brian had mentioned these old fire lookouts scattered throughout the national forests, decommissioned towers from decades past that the Forest Service now rented out to hikers looking for an authentic wilderness experience. I spent hours scrolling through listings on my laptop, comparing different locations and availability. Most of them were booked solid for the season, popular spots that families had reserved months in advance. But there was one listing that kept showing up with wide-open availability. Granite Peak Lookout, built in 1957, elevation 7,800 feet, accessible only by an 8-mile trail that the description politely called challenging. The rental fee was surprisingly cheap, $40 a night, and the guest review section was completely empty, not a single comment or rating. The only photograph attached to the listing was grainy and washed out. Probably taken sometime in the 80s based on the color quality. It showed a small structure perched on a rocky summit, but the details were impossible to make out. The description mentioned basic amenities and rustic charm, which I translated to mean absolutely nothing but 4 walls and a roof. That was fine by me. I wasn't looking for comfort. I was looking for silence. I reserved it for 3 nights in late July, packed my usual gear: tent, sleeping bag, water filtration system, dehydrated meals, first aid kit, and drove 4 hours north to the trailhead. The parking area was nothing more than a widened shoulder on a dirt forest road, marked only by a weathered wooden sign that read Granite Peak Trail 8.2 miles. No other vehicles were parked there. The nearest town was 30 miles back down the mountain, a dying logging community with 1 gas station and a diner that looked like it hadn't been updated since the Nixon administration. I shouldered my pack at exactly 9 in the morning, locked my truck, and started walking. The trail began innocuously enough, winding through second-growth pine forest with occasional glimpses of the valley below. But within the first mile, it became clear why this lookout stayed available all summer. The path was barely maintained, overgrown with brush that scraped against my legs, and the elevation gain was relentless. Every 100 yards seemed to climb another 100 feet, and the summer heat made my shirt stick to my back with sweat. The forest pressed in close on both sides, dense and suffocating. Douglas fir and lodgepole pine created a canopy so thick that even at midday the trail existed in perpetual twilight. Deadfall blocked the path every few 100 yards, forcing me to scramble over moss-covered logs or detour around them. My GPS showed I was following the correct route, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the trail was slowly disappearing beneath my feet, being reclaimed by the forest with each passing season. After 2 hours of hiking, I stopped to rest on a flat boulder and eat an energy bar. The silence was profound. No bird calls, no rustling in the underbrush, no distant hum of traffic or aircraft. Just the sound of my own breathing and the occasional creak of trees swaying in the wind. I checked my phone out of habit, but of course there was no signal. There wouldn't be any signal for the next 3 days. The trail grew steeper in the afternoon, transitioning from switchbacks to straight upward scrambles over granite outcroppings. My knees ached and my shoulders burned from the weight of my pack. I went through 3 liters of water and had to stop twice to refill from small streams using my filtration pump. Each time I knelt by the water, I found myself glancing over my shoulder at the forest behind me, unable to shake the sensation of being observed. It was probably just the isolation playing tricks on my mind, the psychological effect of being truly alone for the first time in months. 5 hours into the hike, the forest finally began to thin. The trees became shorter and more sparse, replaced by scrub brush and exposed rock. I emerged from the tree line onto a rocky ridge and got my first clear view of Granite Peak itself, still another mile distant but finally visible. The fire lookout sat at the summit like a lonely sentinel, exactly as the blurry photograph had shown. It wasn't one of those tall tower lookouts built on stilts that I'd seen in pictures from other forests. This was a squat structure, barely elevated 15 feet off the ground, more cabin than tower. Even from a distance I could see the wood siding was weathered to a silver-gray color. and several of the windows were dark with grime, or maybe covered from the inside. A wraparound catwalk circled the entire structure, accessible by a wooden staircase that zigzagged up from the ground. The final hour of hiking tested every muscle in my legs. The trail became less a path and more a suggestion, marked only by occasional cairns stacked by previous hikers. I had to use my hands to pull myself up over some of the steeper sections, and twice I nearly lost my footing on loose scree that slid away beneath my boots. But when I finally reached the summit at 3 in the afternoon, the view stole whatever breath I had left. The lookout sat on the highest point for miles in any direction, offering a 360-degree panorama of endless mountain ranges fading into blue haze at the horizon. Valleys dropped away on all sides, filled with the dark green of unbroken forest. To the east, I could just make out the silver thread of a river cutting through the wilderness, perhaps 15 miles distant. To the west, more peaks marched into the distance like frozen waves. There wasn't a single road, building, or power line visible anywhere. Just raw wilderness stretching to the edge of the world. I dropped my pack at the base of the stairs and took a moment to catch my breath, drinking in the view and the accomplishment of actually making it here. Then I turned my attention to the fire lookout itself. Up close, the structure looked even older than its 1957 construction date suggested. The wood was dry and cracked, with patches of newer lumber visible where repairs had been made over the decades. Some of the windows had been replaced with modern glass, while others still held the original warped panes that distorted the view. The metal roof showed spots of rust but appeared intact. The door hung slightly crooked on its hinges. I climbed the 23 steps. I counted them, and walked around the catwalk, testing each board before putting my full weight on it. Most felt solid enough, though a few creaked ominously. The door was unlocked, just as the listing had promised. I pushed it open and stepped inside. The interior was a single square room, maybe 15 feet on each side, completely empty except for a few scraps of trash in one corner that previous occupants had left behind. Windows lined all 4 walls, providing that panoramic view even from inside. The wooden floor was swept clean, but showed decades of wear, gouges, stains, and boot scuffs ground into the grain. In one corner I could see where a wood stove had once stood, leaving a discolored square on the floor and a capped pipe extending through the ceiling. The walls were bare wood, no insulation, covered with carved initials and dates going back to the 70s. It was primitive, Spartan, and absolutely perfect. For the next 3 days, this would be my entire world. I spent the rest of the afternoon settling in, spreading my sleeping bag in the center of the room where I'd have equal views out all windows, organizing my food supplies, and just sitting on the catwalk watching the sun track across the sky. I heated water for a dehydrated meal and ate dinner watching the shadows lengthen across the valleys below. The temperature dropped quickly once the sun started setting, and I pulled on an extra fleece layer. By 8 o'clock, full darkness had fallen. The stars came out in impossible numbers, more than I'd ever seen in my life. The Milky Way a bright smear across the black sky. I sat on the catwalk with my back against the door, just watching the universe spin overhead, feeling small and insignificant in the best possible way. I was exhausted from the hike but also wired from the novelty of being here, so I couldn't quite fall asleep when I finally crawled into my sleeping bag around 8:30. I lay there on the hard floor watching the stars through the windows, listening to the wind whisper around the tower. My body ached in that satisfying way that comes from hard physical exertion. Maybe 40 minutes passed. I was just starting to drift off when I heard it, the unmistakable sound of boots on wood. Someone was climbing the stairs. My eyes snapped open and I sat up, heart suddenly pounding. The footsteps were slow, deliberate, ascending 1 step at a time. I scrambled out of my sleeping bag and rushed to the door just as a figure came around the corner of the catwalk. It was a man probably in his late 40s, with shoulder-length blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail. He wore jeans and a flannel shirt, both dusty and worn. What struck me immediately was his expression or lack thereof. He wasn't startled to see me at all. He just smiled, that same easy smile you'd give someone you were expecting to meet. "Great place to stay a few nights, isn't it?" he said, walking closer without any hesitation. "Yeah," I managed, my voice tight. I reserved it for the next 3 nights. He nodded, still smiling. "Beautiful view up here. You can see forever." There was something about his demeanor that set my nerves on edge. He was too comfortable, Too familiar. And more importantly, there was no reason for him to be here. The nearest other trail was miles away, and the parking area at the trailhead had been empty. Even if he'd parked somewhere else, what were the odds of two people independently choosing to hike to the same remote location on the same day? "You camping nearby?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. "Actually," he said, his smile widening, "I was hoping to stay here tonight, in the lookout." The request hung in the air between us. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to just agree, to avoid any confrontation, but another part of me, the part that was listening to my screaming instincts, knew that letting this stranger share this isolated space with me would be a terrible mistake. "Sorry, but my friend is actually on his way up right now." I lied, forcing conviction into my voice. "He's just a few minutes behind. We kind of need the space." The man's smile faded slightly. He looked at me for a long moment, his eyes searching my face, and I had the distinct impression he knew I was lying. But finally, he nodded. "Sure, no problem. I understand." He turned and started back down the stairs, his footsteps echoing on the wood. I watched him descend until he disappeared around the base of the tower, heading into the darkening forest. And that's when I noticed what I should have seen immediately. He had no backpack, no gear of any kind, not even a water bottle or flashlight, just the clothes on his back. Who hikes 8 miles into the wilderness without any equipment? I stood at the railing for another 10 minutes, scanning the forest below, but I couldn't see any sign of him. No campfire, no tent, nothing. Eventually, the cold drove me back inside, but I didn't feel safe anymore. I kept walking to the windows, looking out at the darkness, wondering where he'd gone and why he'd really come here. It took me hours to finally fall asleep, and even then, it was fitful and shallow. Morning light streaming through the windows woke me around 6:30. My body was stiff from sleeping on the hard floor, and my neck ached from using my rolled-up jacket as a pillow. But the morning view was spectacular. Fog filling the valleys like milk poured into bowls, with just the peaks rising above it like islands. I made coffee using my camp stove, boiling water and pouring it over grounds in a filter, then sat on the catwalk cradling the warm cup and watching the fog slowly burn off as the sun climbed higher. The encounter with the strange man from last night felt almost dreamlike in the morning light, easy to rationalize away. Maybe he was a thru hiker who'd gotten lost. Maybe he'd had gear stashed somewhere nearby. Maybe I'd overreacted. After finishing my coffee, I decided to walk down the stairs to stretch my legs. That's when I saw it. A piece of white paper tucked under a small rock on the wooden railing at the base of the stairs. I pulled it out and unfolded it. Written in neat blue ink were just 2 words. "Sorry." The smiley face was the worst part. It transformed what might have been a sincere apology into something mocking, something wrong. My hands started shaking as the implications sank in. This meant the man had come back. Sometime during the night, while I was sleeping, he had climbed these stairs again, or at least approached close enough to leave this note. He'd been here, maybe standing right outside the door, just feet away from where I lay unconscious, and I hadn't heard a thing. I spun around, scanning the forest in all directions, half expecting to see him standing in the trees watching me. But there was nothing. Just endless forest, silent and still. My first instinct was to pack up and leave immediately, but in the morning light, surrounded by that incredible view, the fear seemed irrational. Maybe he really was just apologizing for bothering me last night. Maybe he'd left the note hours ago, right after I'd sent him away, and was now miles away himself. I decided to stay, but I'd be more careful, more aware. I spent the morning exploring the area around the lookout, walking the rocky summit, examining the old survey markers embedded in the stone. I found remnants of the original Firewatch equipment, rusted metal frameworks that once held something, bolt holes drilled into the rock, corroded cables. But I found no sign of the man, no campsite, no footprints beyond my own in the patches of dirt between the rocks. The rest of the day passed uneventfully. I read a book I'd brought, ate my meals, and tried to relax into the solitude I'd come here seeking, but I couldn't quite manage it. That note kept intruding on my thoughts, and I found myself repeatedly walking to the windows, scanning the forest below. As afternoon faded into evening, my anxiety grew. I watched the sun set with a sense of dread, knowing that darkness would soon take away my ability to see the forest. Once night fell, anything could be out there. I stayed up much later than I had the previous night, sitting in the lookout with a small battery-powered lantern hung on a nail I'd found protruding from the wall. The warm LED light pushed back the darkness inside the lookout but made the windows into mirrors, reflecting my own face back at me and preventing me from seeing anything outside. I finally turned off the lantern and sat in the darkness, letting my eyes adjust, watching the forest become visible again in the starlight. It must have been after midnight when I realized I needed to use the bathroom. I'd been putting it off for hours, not wanting to venture outside, but biology eventually won out. I grabbed my lantern and headed down the stairs, walking just to the edge of the tree line about 50 feet from the base of the lookout. I was about to set the lantern down when I saw movement in my peripheral vision. Something shifted in the trees just at the edge of the light's reach. I froze, holding the lantern higher, trying to see better. "Hello?" My voice sounded small and scared, even to my own ears. Silence. No response, no further movement. Just the quiet whisper of wind through pine needles. I stood there for what felt like an eternity but was probably only 30 seconds, my heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. Then I turned and ran back to the lookout, taking the stairs 3 at a time, not caring how much noise I made. Inside, I slammed the door closed, even though I knew it wouldn't help. There was no lock, no way to secure it. The windows on all sides made me feel exposed, vulnerable. If someone was out there, they could see me perfectly in the lantern light, while I could see nothing but darkness and my own reflection. I knew I should turn off the lantern to restore my night vision, to have some chance of seeing outside. But the thought of sitting in complete darkness, knowing someone might be out there, was too terrifying, so I kept it lit and tried to position myself where I could see out without being silhouetted against the light. For the next hour, I moved from window to window, pressing my face close to the glass, trying to spot any movement in the forest below. The stairs were just barely visible in the starlight, a pale geometric shape against the darker rock. I was considering packing up my things, preparing to make a run for it despite the darkness and the 8 miles of difficult trail ahead, when I finally saw him. A figure stood at the base of the stairs, partially hidden by the support structure but clearly visible. He wasn't moving, just standing there, perfectly still, staring up at the lookout. Even at this distance, even with limited light, I knew it was the same man, the same height, the same posture, the same blonde hair. Terror washed over me like ice water. He wasn't hiking through. He wasn't lost. He was watching me, had probably been watching me this whole time. The note this morning was him letting me know he could reach me whenever he wanted. And now here he was again, in the middle of the night, standing at the base of my only exit like a predator waiting at the mouth of a den. I watched him for what felt like an eternity but was probably only 2 or 3 minutes. He never looked away from the lookout, never moved except for the slight sway of his hair in the wind. Then finally, he took 2 steps backward, paused and walked off into the forest in a direction I couldn't see from my angle. I waited at the window for another 20 minutes, but he didn't reappear. My mind was racing through terrible possibilities. What if he was circling around, approaching from a different direction? What if he was climbing up the far side of the rocks, planning to come at me from an unexpected angle? What if he came back with others? I made my decision. I was leaving. Right now. Staying here until morning was no longer an option. The man's behavior had crossed from strange to threatening, and every instinct I had was screaming at me to get away. I moved as quickly and quietly as possible, stuffing my sleeping bag into my pack, rolling up my sleeping pad, gathering my scattered belongings. Every 30 seconds I'd stop and move to the window, checking to make sure he hadn't returned to the stairs. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely work the clips on my backpack. It took me 15 minutes to pack everything. I did a final check out all the windows, saw nothing, shouldered my pack, and quietly opened the door. The night air was cold against my face. I stood on the catwalk for a moment, listening, but heard nothing except wind and the distant sound of something, an owl maybe, calling from the valley. I descended the stairs as quietly as possible, testing each step before putting my full weight on it, trying to minimize the creaking. At the bottom I paused again, scanning the forest in all directions. Nothing. No movement. No sound. No sign of the man. I pulled my pocket knife from my pack and opened it, holding it in my right hand with the blade pointed forward. It wasn't much of a weapon, but it was something. Then I started walking, following the trail back the way I'd come, moving as quickly as I dared in the darkness. For the first 15 minutes, I navigated by starlight alone, not wanting to use my lantern and advertise my position. But the trail was treacherous enough in daylight, and in the dark it was nearly impossible to follow. I had to stop every few steps to make sure I was still on the path, searching for the worn groove or the break in the vegetation that marked the way. Finally, I had to risk it. I pulled out my lantern and turned it on, keeping it low and pointed at the ground. The circle of LED light showed me the trail clearly, but it also destroyed my night vision and created a bubble of visibility beyond which everything became impenetrable darkness. For all I knew, the man could be standing 20 feet away, and I'd never see him. I walked faster, my breath coming in gasps that had nothing to do with exertion, and everything to do with fear. Every sound made me jump. A branch cracking, something small scurrying through the underbrush, the wind moaning through the trees. I kept glancing over my shoulder, convinced I would see him following me, but the darkness behind me remained empty. The hike down felt endless. Time lost all meaning in the darkness, marked only by my footsteps and the swing of the lantern. I followed the trail through forests that seemed to clutch at me with grasping branches, over logs that had appeared smaller in daylight, around boulders that loomed like crouching giants in the lantern's glow. My legs ached from the constant downhill grade, my knees protesting with each jarring step. I went through the last of my water and didn't stop to refill, too afraid to pause for even a minute. The knife stayed open in my hand, my fingers cramping around the handle but refusing to let go. As the hours crawled by, a new fear began to emerge. What if I'd somehow taken a wrong turn? What if I was following an animal trail deeper into the wilderness instead of back to civilization? The trail wasn't well marked even in daylight, and in the dark I was navigating more by instinct and hope than any real certainty. But I couldn't stop. The only direction was forward. Around 4 in the morning, I noticed the darkness beginning to lift, the sky transitioning from black to deep blue. Dawn was still an hour away, but the stars were fading, and slowly, gradually, I could begin to make out shapes beyond the circle of my lantern light. The forest became less oppressive as features emerged from the darkness. That fallen tree I remembered passing yesterday. The boulder split in two by a tree growing through its center. The switchback where the trail doubled back on itself. I was on the right path. I was going to make it. By 5:30, there was enough light to turn off my lantern. My hand ached when I finally released my grip on the knife and folded it closed. The morning was cold, my breath visible in white clouds, but I barely noticed. I was too focused on maintaining my pace, on putting as much distance as possible between myself and that lookout. The sun finally broke over the eastern peaks around 6:15, flooding the forest with golden light that felt like a benediction. The temperature rose rapidly, and I could feel sweat running down my back beneath my pack. My legs felt like rubber. My knees threatened to buckle with each step, but I kept moving. At 7:43 in the morning, I checked my watch. I finally stumbled out of the forest onto the dirt road where I'd parked. My truck sat exactly where I'd left it, covered in a fine layer of dust but otherwise untouched. I'd never been so happy to see a vehicle in my life. I threw my pack in the bed, climbed into the cab, and locked the doors. The first time I'd been behind a locked door in 2 days. My hands were still shaking as I started the engine and pulled onto the road, not looking back at the trailhead or the forest beyond. I drove straight through to the nearest town, stopped at the gas station, and sat in the parking lot for 20 minutes trying to process what had happened. Part of me wanted to report it, to tell someone that there was a man stalking hikers at Granite Peak Lookout. But what would I even say? That a man asked to share a shelter, left a note, and stood at the bottom of some stairs. None of those things were technically crimes, and without any evidence, without even a clear description of his face in the darkness, what could anyone do? I keep thinking about what he said that first night. I was hoping to stay here tonight. Not I was planning to camp nearby, or I was looking for shelter. He specifically wanted to stay in that lookout. With me. And when I refused and lied about having a friend joining me, he came back. Multiple times. Testing me. Waiting. I also keep thinking about the note. That smiley face. The way it transformed sorry into something threatening. He was letting me know he could reach me anytime he wanted. That I was vulnerable. That there was nothing I could do to keep him away. But what haunts me most is that I told him I'd booked the lookout for 3 nights. He knew I'd planned to stay through the weekend. If I hadn't left when I did, if I'd convinced myself in the morning that I was overreacting and decided to stay, he would have known I'd be there for one more night. What would have happened on that third night? What was he planning? I'll never know, and I'm grateful for that ignorance. But sometimes, late at night in my locked apartment back in the city, I think about that fire lookout sitting alone on its peak, and I wonder if he's still there, waiting for the next person to make the 8-mile hike, watching the stairs for the next visitor who doesn't realize they're not alone in the wilderness. And I'm grateful I had the sense to trust my instincts, to recognize danger when it presented itself wearing a friendly smile, and to run while I still could. The Montana sun was just beginning to peek over the horizon as I made my way through the dense forest, following the familiar path to the research facility. The morning air was crisp, filled with the scent of pine and damp earth. It was October 15th, 2025, and at 38 years old I had been working as a geneticist for the U.S. government for over a decade. My name is David Myers, though few people here knew me by that name. In this place, secrecy was currency, and true identities were buried beneath layers of clearance and carefully crafted pseudonyms. As I approached the facility, its imposing structure came into view. To the untrained eye, it might have looked like nothing more than an abandoned warehouse, its exterior weathered and unremarkable, but I knew better. Beneath that unassuming facade lay a labyrinth of cutting-edge laboratories and containment units, all dedicated to pushing the boundaries of genetic engineering. I pressed my palm against the hidden biometric scanner, concealed within a knot in an old oak tree. A soft beep confirmed my identity, and a section of the forest floor silently slid away, revealing a steep staircase descending into darkness. As I made my way down, fluorescent lights flickered to life, illuminating the sterile white walls of the underground passage. The air grew cooler as I descended, the scent of pine replaced by the sharp tang of disinfectant. The low hum of machinery grew louder with each step, a constant reminder of the facility's ceaseless activity. At the bottom of the stairs, I faced another security checkpoint. This time, a retinal scan and a series of complex gestures were required to grant me access. As the final door hissed open, I stepped into the heart of the facility. The main atrium was a hive of activity. Even at this early hour, scientists in pristine white lab coats hurried from one section to another, their faces a mix of excitement and exhaustion. Holographic displays flickered in the air, showing complex genetic sequences and real-time data from various experiments. I made my way to my workstation in the genetics wing, nodding to a few colleagues as I passed. Most kept their heads down, focused intently on their work. In a place like this, friendly chatter was rare. We all knew the weight of our responsibilities, the secrecy our work demanded. As I settled into my chair and powered up my computer, Dr. Sharon Lewis, one of the few people I considered a friend in this isolated world, approached my desk. Her usually meticulously styled hair was disheveled, and dark circles under her eyes suggested she had been here all night. "David," she said, her voice low and urgent, "we need to talk about Subject 5. I felt a chill run down my spine at the mention of our most classified project. Subject 5 was the culmination of years of research, a creature born from the fusion of Komodo dragon and grizzly bear DNA. It was meant to be the ultimate adaptive organism, capable of surviving in the harshest conditions and regenerating from severe injuries. But lately things had been different." "What's happened?" I asked, leaning in close to ensure our conversation remained private. Sharon glanced around nervously before continuing. "It's growing again. And not just physically. The cognitive tests we ran yesterday, David, it's off the charts. It's learning at a rate we've never seen before." I ran a hand through my hair, a habit I developed when stressed. "That's impossible. We designed its neural pathways to have limits. It shouldn't be capable of this level of growth." "Well, it is," Sharon replied, her voice tinged with a mix of fear and awe. "And that's not all. It's been watching us. Not just observing, but studying. The way it tracks movement, the way it responds to stimuli, it's almost as if it's analyzing us." The implications of what Sharon was saying sent a wave of unease through me. We had created Subject 5 to be adaptable, yes, but always within our control. If it was truly developing beyond our parameters, we could be dealing with something far more dangerous than we had ever anticipated. We need to inform Dr. Reiner, I said, referring to the project lead. If Subject 5 is evolving this rapidly, we may need to consider termination protocols. Sharon nodded, her face grim. He's called an emergency meeting for this afternoon. But David, I think we both know it might be too late for that. As Sharon walked away, I turned to my computer, pulling up the latest data on Subject 5. As I scrolled through the charts and graphs, each showing exponential growth and development, a sense of dread began to settle in my stomach. We had set out to create a new form of life, something that could revolutionize warfare and survival in extreme conditions. But as I stared at the cold, hard data before me, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had created something we could no longer control. Little did I know, as I sat there poring over the data, that in just a few short hours my worst fears would be realized. The creature we had brought into this world was about to break free, and the quiet, secluded facility I had called home for so long would become a battleground for survival. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and tried to steady my nerves. There was work to be done, tests to run, and a creature to contain. But deep down, a voice whispered that we were already too late. The calm I felt in that moment was nothing more than the deceptive quiet before a storm of unimaginable proportions. As I opened my eyes and began my day's work, I had no idea that by nightfall, everything I knew about Project Nemesis, about my colleagues, and about the very nature of life itself would be forever changed. The hands of the clock ticked steadily onward, counting down to a moment that would alter the course of my life, and potentially the fate of the world forever. The hours ticked by with an agonizing slowness as I immersed myself in the latest data from Subject 5. Each new piece of information only served to deepen my unease. The creature's cellular structure was evolving at a rate that defied all our previous models. Its neural pathways were reconfiguring themselves in patterns we had never seen before in any known species. As the afternoon approached, I made my way to the high-security wing where Subject 5 was housed. The creature's containment unit was a marvel of engineering, a reinforced chamber the size of a small warehouse, with walls of foot-thick transparent aluminum. As I approached, I could see the creature through the barrier, its massive form curled in one corner. Subject 5 had grown to the size of a small elephant, its body a grotesque fusion of reptilian scales and thick bear-like fur. Its head swiveled towards me as I entered the observation area, and I felt a chill run down my spine as its eyes locked onto mine. Those eyes, they were different now. No longer the cold reptilian stare of a predator, but something more, something unsettlingly intelligent. Fascinating, isn't it? The voice startled me out of my reverie. Dr. Reiner had entered the room, his weathered face set in lines of concentration as he gazed at the creature. Fascinating isn't the word I'd use, I replied, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. Sir, have you seen the latest cognitive test results? This thing is evolving, Dr. Reiner finished for me. Yes, I've seen the data. It's unprecedented, David. We're on the brink of something revolutionary here. I turned to face him, incredulous. Revolutionary? Dr. Reiner, with all due respect, we're losing control. This creature is developing faster than we can study it. We need to consider implementing the termination protocol before... Before what? Dr. Reiner's voice had taken on a sharp edge. Before we unlock the secrets of accelerated evolution? Before we create the perfect adaptive organism? Do you have any idea what this could mean for humanity, David? I felt my frustration rising. I know exactly what it could mean, sir. It could mean unleashing something we can't control. Something that could threaten not just this facility, but potentially the entire world. Dr. Reiner's eyes narrowed. You're letting fear cloud your judgment, David. We're scientists. We don't run from the unknown. We embrace it. We study it. We master it. Before I could respond, an alarm blared through the facility. Red lights began flashing, and a computerized voice echoed through the corridors. Warning, containment breach in Sector 7. All personnel evacuate immediately. My blood ran cold. Sector 7 was where we kept our other test subjects, the precursors to Subject 5. If they were loose, Dr. Reiner was already moving, barking orders into his comm unit. I cast one last glance at Subject 5, only to find it staring directly at me. And in that moment, I could have sworn I saw a flicker of something in its eyes. Understanding. Anticipation. I sprinted out of the observation room, my heart pounding in my chest. The corridors were chaos, filled with panicked researchers and security personnel rushing in all directions. I fought against the tide, making my way toward Sector 7. As I rounded a corner, I collided with Sharon. Her lab coat was torn, and there was a wild look in her eyes. "David," she gasped, clutching my arm. "It's a disaster. The subjects in Sector 7. They're loose, and they're changing." "What do you mean?" I demanded. But deep down, I already knew the answer. "They're evolving, just like Subject 5, Sharon explained, her voice shaking. "But faster, more aggressively. It's like they're adapting to their freedom. David, they're killing anyone they come across." The implications hit me like a physical blow. If the lesser subjects were capable of this, what would happen if Subject 5 broke free? "We need to lock down the facility," I said, trying to think through the panic clouding my mind. "Contain the outbreak and prevent Subject 5 from—" My words were cut off by a deafening roar that seemed to shake the very foundations of the facility. It was a sound I had heard before, but never with such power, such intent. Sharon's face went pale. "That's not from Sector 7, she whispered. As if in confirmation, the facility's AI spoke again. "Warning. Containment breach in Subject 5 habitat. All personnel initiate emergency protocol Omega." For a moment, time seemed to stand still. The enormity of what was happening crashed over me like a tidal wave. We had created something beyond our understanding, beyond our control, and now it was free. The sound of shattering glass and twisting metal echoed through the corridor, growing louder by the second. Sharon and I exchanged a look of pure terror. "Run," I said, and we both took off down the hallway, the sounds of destruction nipping at our heels. As we ran, I couldn't shake the image of Subject 5's eyes from my mind. Those weren't the eyes of a mindless beast. They were the eyes of something that had been waiting, planning, evolving for this very moment. We had sought to play God, to create life and mold it to our will. But in our arrogance, we had failed to consider a crucial question. What if our creation decided it no longer needed its creators? The facility, once a bastion of scientific ambition, had become a labyrinth of terror. And somewhere in its twisted corridors, a creature of our own making was hunting us. The true test of survival was about to begin, and I had a sickening feeling that we were woefully unprepared for what was to come. The corridors of the facility had transformed into a nightmare landscape. Emergency lights bathed everything in a pulsating red glow, casting grotesque shadows that seemed to reach out with grasping fingers. The air was thick with the acrid smell of smoke and something else. Something primal and musky that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Sharon and I raced through the chaos, our lab coats flapping behind us like broken wings. The sounds of destruction grew louder, punctuated by screams that were abruptly cut short. My mind reeled, trying to process the situation while simultaneously plotting our escape. "We need to get to the emergency bunker," I shouted to Sharon over the din of alarms and distant roars. "It's our best chance of survival until help arrives." She nodded grimly, her face a mask of determination and fear. We rounded a corner and came face to face with a scene of carnage that stopped us in our tracks. The corridor was strewn with bodies, or what was left of them. Blood painted the walls in abstract patterns, and the floor was littered with discarded limbs and viscera. Sharon retched, turning away from the gruesome sight. I fought the urge to do the same, forcing myself to scan the area for any sign of immediate danger. That's when I saw it. A trail of bloody footprints leading away from the massacre. They were massive, easily twice the size of a human foot, with clear imprints of claws that had torn into the metal flooring. "It's learning," I muttered, a chill running down my spine. "It's adapting to bipedal movement." Before Sharon could respond, a blood-curdling shriek echoed from somewhere behind us. It wasn't the roar of Subject 5, but something smaller, faster, one of the escape test subjects from Sector 7. "Move," I yelled, grabbing Sharon's arm and pulling her into motion. We sprinted down the corridor, following the emergency exit signs that would lead us to the bunker. The shrieking grew louder, accompanied by the sound of claws scrabbling against metal. We burst through a set of double doors into a large laboratory. Equipment lay scattered and broken across the floor. and sparks flew from damaged electrical panels. I quickly scanned the room, looking for anything we could use as a weapon. The doors behind us exploded inward, and a creature lunged into the lab. It was one of our early experiments, a fusion of wolf and mountain lion DNA, but it had changed, grown larger and more fearsome. Its eyes gleamed with a feral intelligence as it stalked towards us, muscles rippling beneath its mottled fur. Sharon backed away, her hands fumbling for something on a nearby lab table. The creature tensed, preparing to pounce. Time seemed to slow as I watched its haunches coil, ready to spring. In that moment, Sharon's hand closed around a fire extinguisher. With a cry of desperation, she swung it in a wide arc, catching the leaping creature midair. There was a sickening crunch as the metal canister connected with its skull, sending it crashing into a bank of computers. "Run!" Sharon screamed, dropping the extinguisher and bolting for the far door. I didn't need to be told twice. We raced through the exit, the sounds of the creature's enraged howls spurring us on. The next few minutes were a blur of endless corridors and stairwells. My lungs burned, and my legs felt like lead, but terror kept me moving. Finally, we reached the entrance to the emergency bunker, a massive steel door set into the bedrock of the mountain. I slammed my hand onto the biometric scanner, praying that the backup systems were still operational. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Then, with a hiss of hydraulics, the door began to slide open. We squeezed through as soon as the gap was wide enough, and I immediately hit the emergency lockdown button on the inside panel. The door slid shut with a resounding clang, sealing us inside. The sudden silence was almost as shocking as the chaos we'd just escaped. Sharon and I stood there, chests heaving as we gulped in air. The bunker's soft blue emergency lighting was a stark contrast to the hellish red we'd left behind. "We made it," Sharon gasped, leaning against the wall for support. "Oh God, David, what have we done?" I didn't answer immediately, my mind still racing. We were safe for the moment, but for how long? And what about the others? How many had survived the initial outbreak? I moved to the bunker's main console, bringing up the facility's security feeds. Most of the cameras were offline, showing nothing but static, but a few were still operational, offering glimpses of the horror unfolding above us. One feed showed a group of researchers barricaded in a lab, desperately trying to hold the door shut as something massive pounded against it from the outside. Another revealed a corridor where two of the smaller test subjects were tearing into the body of a security guard. And then I saw it. Subject 5. The creature had grown even larger, its form a nightmarish blend of bear, lizard, and something altogether alien. It moved with a purpose, its head swiveling as it systematically checked each room it passed. It was hunting, searching. A chill ran down my spine as I realized the truth. This wasn't just an escape. It wasn't just a rampage of mindless violence. Subject 5 was methodically sweeping the facility, and I had a sickening feeling I knew what, or who it was looking for. "Sharon," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "I think it's looking for us, the ones who created it." Her eyes widened in horror as she joined me at the console, watching the creature's deliberate progress through the facility. "But why?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Why us?" I shook my head, unable to tear my eyes away from the screen. "I don't know. Revenge. Curiosity. Or maybe," I trailed off, a new and terrifying thought forming in my mind. "Maybe what, David?" Sharon pressed, gripping my arm. I turned to face her, the full weight of our actions crashing down upon me. Maybe it wants to understand its creators, to learn from us, to surpass us. The implications hung in the air between us, heavy and suffocating. We had created a new form of life, one that was evolving at an unprecedented rate. And now, it seemed, that creation wanted to meet its makers. As if in response to my words, Subject 5 suddenly stopped its movement through the corridor. It turned its massive head, looking directly into the camera. Those eyes, intelligent, curious, and utterly alien, seemed to stare right through the lens and into my soul. A low, rumbling growl emanated from its throat, and I swore I could feel the vibrations even through the layers of rock and steel that separated us. The message was clear. It knew we were watching, and it was coming for us. The bunker's oppressive silence was broken only by the soft hum of equipment and our ragged breathing. Sharon paced nervously, her footsteps echoing off the metal walls. while I remained transfixed by the security feeds. Most screens now showed only static, but a few still flickered with scenes of destruction and chaos. "We need a plan," Sharon said, her voice tight with tension. "We can't just sit here and wait for that thing to find us." I tore my eyes away from the monitors, forcing myself to think rationally. "You're right. First things first. We need to assess our resources. This bunker was designed to sustain a small team for weeks if necessary. Let's see what we have to work with." We began a systematic search of the bunker, cataloging supplies and equipment, emergency rations, water purifiers, medical kits, all the essentials for long-term survival. But what caught my attention was a secure locker in the back of the bunker. "Sharon, help me with this," I called out, examining the biometric lock. Together, we placed our palms on the scanner. After a tense moment, the lock disengaged with a soft click. Inside, we found a cache of weapons, high-powered tranquilizer rifles, stun batons, and even a few conventional firearms. A chill ran down my spine as I realized the implications. This bunker wasn't just for riding out emergencies. It was a last line of defense. "David," Sharon's voice was barely above a whisper. "Look at this." She held up a tablet, its screen glowing with encrypted files. "It's Dr. Reiner's personal data cache. Everything about Project Nemesis. All the details we were never privy to." My hands shook slightly as I took the tablet from her. Let's see what secrets the good doctor was keeping from us. For the next hour, we pored over the files, each new revelation more shocking than the last. Project Nemesis wasn't just about creating adaptive organisms for military applications. It was about pushing the very boundaries of evolution itself. "My God," I muttered, scrolling through pages of genetic sequences and theoretical models. They weren't just splicing DNA. They were trying to unlock rapid, directed evolution to create organisms that could adapt to any environment in real time. Sharon leaned in, her eyes widening as she read over my shoulder. "But that's impossible. The energy requirements alone would be astronomical," I finished for her. "Unless..." We looked at each other, the same horrifying realization dawning on us both. "Unless they found a way to draw energy from their environment," Sharon said, her voice barely above a whisper, "to fuel their evolution by consuming other life forms." The implications hit me like a physical blow. We hadn't just created a monster. We had created a perfect predator, one that evolved with every kill, becoming stronger, smarter, more adapted to its prey. A sudden bang from above made us both jump. Something was in the ventilation system, moving through the ducts with surprising speed. "It can't be Subject 5, Sharon said, her voice shaking. "It's too big for the vents." "No," I agreed, grabbing one of the tranquilizer rifles. "But remember, it wasn't the only thing that escaped." We backed away from the ceiling, weapons raised. The banging grew louder, more frantic. Something was trying to get in. With a screech of tearing metal, a section of the vent cover burst open. A blur of fur and claws dropped into the room. One of the smaller test subjects, a hybrid of lynx and mongoose. But like the creature we had encountered earlier, this one had changed, evolved. Its body was leaner, more streamlined, with oversized eyes adapted for the dim light of the bunker. It crouched, muscles coiled to spring. In that split second before it attacked, I saw something in its eyes that chilled me to my core, not just hunger or aggression, but a cold, calculating intelligence. I fired the tranquilizer rifle, the dart whistling through the air. But the creature was faster, dodging with inhuman speed. It launched itself at Sharon, claws extended. She screamed, bringing up her arm to protect her face. The creature's claws raked across her forearm, leaving deep gashes. But Sharon didn't falter. She swung the stun baton in her other hand, catching the hybrid mid-leap. There was a crack of electricity, and a high-pitched shriek. The creature convulsed, then fell to the floor, twitching. I rushed to Sharon's side, examining her wound. "We need to treat this now," I said, already reaching for the medical kit. As I cleaned and bandaged her arm, Sharon stared at the fallen creature, her face pale. "David," she said softly, "look at its claws." I followed her gaze and felt my blood run cold. The creature's claws were changing, elongating and hardening before our eyes. It was adapting, evolving in response to our defenses. We can't stay here, I said, finishing the bandage with shaking hands. If this one found a way in, a bone-shaking roar cut me off, so loud it seemed to make the very air vibrate. It was close. Too close. Subject 5 had found us. The emergency exit, Sharon gasped, clutching her injured arm. There's a tunnel that leads to the surface. We grabbed what supplies we could, stuffing them into backpacks along with weapons and the tablet containing Dr. Reiner's files. As we ran for the exit, I cast one last glance at the security feeds. Every screen was filled with the same image. Subject 5's massive form, its eyes staring directly into the camera, and behind it, barely visible in the shadows, were more shapes, smaller but just as deadly. The other test subjects following their alpha. They had formed a pack, and we were the prey. As we entered the escape tunnel, the sound of tearing metal echoed behind us. The bunker door was giving way. Our desperate race for survival had only just begun. The escape tunnel was a claustrophobic nightmare, barely wide enough for us to move single file. The air was stale and heavy with the scent of damp earth. Our footsteps echoed off the rough-hewn walls, each sound seeming to mock our attempts at stealth. I led the way, the beam of my flashlight casting long, twisted shadows ahead of us. Sharon followed close behind, her breathing ragged and punctuated by occasional whimpers of pain. I could only imagine how much her injured arm must be hurting, but we couldn't afford to stop. The roars and screeches from the creatures pursuing us grew fainter as we delved deeper into the tunnel, but I knew better than to feel relieved. If anything, the silence was more terrifying. Those things were hunters, and hunters knew the value of stealth. David, Sharon gasped after what felt like hours of climbing. I need to rest, just for a moment. I wanted to push on, every instinct screaming at me to keep moving, but one look at Sharon's pale, sweat-streaked face told me she was at her limit. We needed to regroup, to plan our next move. All right, I conceded, scanning our surroundings. There's a small alcove up ahead. We can stop there, catch our breath. The alcove was little more than a natural indentation in the rock, but it offered some shelter and a chance to get our bearings. As Sharon slumped against the wall, I dug through our hastily packed supplies for the medical kit. Let me see your arm, I said, trying to keep my voice steady as I unwrapped the makeshift bandage. The wound beneath made my stomach churn. The gashes left by the creature's claws were deep, the flesh around them an angry red. But what truly horrified me were the faint, web-like patterns spreading from the wound, dark lines branching out under Sharon's skin. Oh God, Sharon whispered, seeing the look on my face. It's changing me, isn't it? I swallowed hard, forcing myself to think clinically. We don't know that for sure. It could just be an infection. I'm going to clean it again and give you a strong antibiotic. That should help. Even as I said the words, I knew they were likely a lie. Whatever was happening to Sharon was beyond the scope of normal medicine. The creature that had attacked her was designed to evolve, to adapt. Who knew what kind of pathogens or mutagens its claws might carry? As I rebandaged her arm, a low rumble echoed through the tunnel. It wasn't the roar of Subject 5, but something deeper, more primal. The very rock around us seemed to shudder. What was that? Sharon asked, her eyes wide with fear. Before I could answer, the tremor came again. Stronger this time. Small pebbles and dust rained down from the ceiling. Earthquake, Sharon suggested, but I shook my head. No, this is something else. Remember, this facility was built into an old mining complex. These tunnels probably run for miles, connecting to all sorts of unstable caverns, and my words were cut off as a deafening crack split the air. The floor beneath us shifted, and suddenly we were falling, tumbling into darkness as the tunnel collapsed around us. I reached out blindly, managing to grab Sharon's hand as we slid down a steep incline of loose rock and soil. We hit the bottom hard, the impact knocking the wind out of me. For a moment I lay there, dazed and gasping for breath. The beam of my flashlight, miraculously still functioning, illuminated a swirling cloud of dust. Sharon, I called out, my voice hoarse. Sharon, are you all right? A groan to my left answered me. I crawled towards the sound, my hands finding Sharon's form in the darkness. I'm okay, she managed, though her voice was strained. Just bruised. Where are we? As the dust began to settle, I swung my flashlight around, revealing our new surroundings. We had fallen into a vast cavern, its ceiling lost in darkness high above us. The walls glittered with mineral deposits, and in the distance I could hear the sound of running water. But what caught my attention, what made my blood run cold, were the markings on the cavern walls. Crude paintings, ancient beyond imagining, depicted scenes that sent a shiver down my spine. Human figures, dwarfed by monstrous shapes, creatures that seemed to shift and change from one image to the next, and everywhere, a symbol that looked disturbingly like a double helix. "David," Sharon whispered, following the beam of my flashlight. "What is this place?" I shook my head, unable to find words. The implications were too vast, too terrifying to contemplate. Had our experiments somehow tapped into something ancient? Something that had been here long before us? A splash echoed from the darkness, followed by a low, guttural growl. We weren't alone in this cavern. "We need to move," I said, helping Sharon to her feet. Now, as we stumbled forward deeper into the unknown, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had stumbled upon something far bigger than Project Nemesis, something that might hold the key to our survival, or spell doom, not just for us, but for all of humanity. The hunt continued, but now I wasn't sure if we were the hunters or the hunted, and in the depths of the earth, surrounded by echoes of a forgotten past, the line between predator and prey seemed to blur with every step we took. We moved through the cavern with agonizing slowness, every step a potential betrayal in the uneven terrain. The beam of my flashlight seemed pitifully inadequate against the vast darkness that surrounded us. Barely illuminating a few feet ahead, the air was thick with moisture and the musty scent of age-old decay. Sharon leaned heavily on me, her injured arm cradled against her chest. I could feel the heat radiating from her skin, even through our clothes. Whatever was happening to her, it was progressing rapidly. "David," she whispered, her voice weak. "I need to rest, just for a moment." I wanted to push on, but I knew she was at her limit. We found a small outcropping of rock that offered some shelter and settled down. As Sharon slumped against the cool stone, I took the opportunity to examine our surroundings more closely. The cavern walls were a testament to deep time, layers upon layers of sediment telling a story millions of years in the making. But it was the paintings that drew my attention once more. In the shifting light of the flashlight, they seemed almost alive, the crude figures dancing across the stone. "What do you think they mean?" Sharon asked, following my gaze. I shook my head, trying to make sense of the images. "I'm not sure. But look at this." I pointed to a recurring symbol, a spiraling shape that bore an uncanny resemblance to a DNA double helix. "This can't be a coincidence." Sharon's eyes widened. "You don't think? Could our research have somehow awakened something? Something that was already here?" Before I could respond, a low growl echoed through the cavern. We froze, barely daring to breathe. The sound came again, closer this time, accompanied by the scrape of claws on stone. "We need to move," I whispered, helping Sharon to her feet. We stumbled forward, deeper into the cavern. The sound of running water grew louder, and soon we found ourselves on the bank of an underground river. The water was black as ink, flowing swift and silent into the darkness. A screech tore through the air, so close it made my ears ring. I whirled around, flashlight beam dancing wildly across the cavern walls. For a split second, I caught a glimpse of movement, a flash of scales and fur, eyes gleaming in the darkness. "Run!" I shouted, all pretense of stealth abandoned. We splashed into the river, the icy water shocking me to my core. The current was strong, threatening to sweep us off our feet, but it was our only chance. As we struggled against the flow, I heard a series of splashes behind us. Our pursuers had entered the water. I chanced to look back and immediately wished I hadn't. Multiple shapes were cutting through the water with terrifying speed, their forms a nightmarish blend of aquatic and terrestrial adaptations. "They're evolving," Sharon gasped, her voice filled with a mix of terror and scientific awe. "Adapting to the water in real time." I gritted my teeth, pushing forward with every ounce of strength I had left. Less admiring, more swimming. The river carried us deeper into the earth, through twisting tunnels and vast chambers. Several times we were nearly dashed against rocks or dragged under by swirling eddies, All the while the creatures pursued us, their inhuman shrieks echoing off the cavern walls. Just as I thought my strength would give out, the river widened into a large, calm pool. We dragged ourselves onto a rocky shore, coughing and gasping for air. But our reprieve was short-lived. A massive shape rose from the water behind us, water cascading off scales that shifted and changed color to match the surrounding rock. It was Subject 5, but it had changed once again. Its form was now a perfect blend of terrestrial predator and aquatic hunter. As it loomed over us, I felt a strange calm settle over me. This was it. We had come so far, unraveled so many mysteries, only to meet our end in this forgotten underworld. But then, something unexpected happened. Subject 5 didn't attack. Instead, it cocked its massive head, studying us with those unnervingly intelligent eyes. And then, to my utter astonishment, it spoke. The sound was unlike anything I had ever heard. A guttural, resonating tone that seemed to bypass my ears and vibrate directly in my skull. But somehow, impossibly, I understood. Creators, it said, the word filled with a mix of curiosity, anger, and something that might have been respect. Why? Sharon and I exchanged a look of pure disbelief. Our creation, our monster, had achieved something we had never even considered possible. It had evolved the capacity for language. As I stared into those alien eyes, I realized that everything had changed. We were no longer simply running for our lives. We were on the brink of a communication that could change the very course of evolution itself. With trembling voice, I began to speak, hoping against hope that I could find the words to bridge the gap between creator and creation, between past and future, between human and whatever Subject 5 had become. The fate of our world, I realized, might hinge on this impossible conversation in the depths of the earth. The cavern fell into an eerie silence, broken only by the soft lapping of water against the shore and our ragged breathing. Subject 5 towered over us, its massive form blocking out what little ambient light filtered through the cavern. In the beam of my flashlight, I could see its scales shifting, adapting to the environment in real time. Why, it repeated, the word reverberating through my bones. I swallowed hard, my mind racing. How do you explain the hubris of scientific ambition to a creature born of that very hubris? We created you to understand, I began, my voice shaking. To push the boundaries of what was possible. We wanted to unlock the secrets of evolution, to create life that could adapt to any environment. Subject 5's eyes narrowed, a disturbingly human expression on its alien face. Understand? No. Control. Power. You sought mastery over life itself. Sharon spoke up, her voice weak but determined. You're right. We were arrogant. We thought we could control the forces of nature, bend them to our will, but we were wrong. The creature turned its gaze to her, nostrils flaring. It seemed to sense the changes happening within her body, the result of the earlier attack. You change, it said. Not a question but a statement. Evolve. Like us. Sharon nodded, a mix of fear and fascination in her eyes. Yes. It seems your genetic material is highly transmissible, adaptive. Subject 5 made a sound that might have been a laugh, a rumbling that shook the very air around us. Not transmissible, assimilative. We absorb, adapt, evolve. All life, one life. The implications of its words hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't just about creating an adaptable organism. Subject 5 and its kind were capable of assimilating the genetic material of other life forms, incorporating it into their own evolution. They weren't just predators, they were a force of nature unto themselves. But why hunt us? I asked, struggling to understand. If you can evolve, adapt to any environment, why seek out your creators? Subject 5's form shifted, its features becoming more defined, almost human. To understand, to know why we exist, to decide. Decide what? Sharon asked, her scientific curiosity overriding her fear. The creature's next words chilled me to my core. Whether creators deserve to exist alongside creation. In that moment I realized the true magnitude of what we had done. We hadn't just created a new life form. We had birthed a new stage of evolution, one that had the power to absorb and assimilate all other life on Earth. And now, that creation was judging us. determining whether humanity itself was worthy of continued existence. "We've made mistakes," I said, desperately trying to find the right words. "Terrible mistakes. But humanity is more than just its flaws. We create, we love, we strive to understand the universe around us. And destroy," Subject 5 countered. "Pollute. Extinguish other life." I couldn't argue with that. Humanity's track record with the environment and other species was far from stellar. But I couldn't let this be the end of our story. "Yes, we've done great harm," I admitted. "But we also have the capacity for great good, for change, for growth." I paused, a realization dawning on me. "Just like you, we evolve too. Not physically like you, but mentally, culturally. We learn from our mistakes." Subject 5 was silent for a long moment, its form continuing to shift and change as it processed my words. Finally, it spoke again. "Show us," it said. "Prove that humanity can evolve, can coexist, or we will absorb, assimilate, become the new dominant life." With those words, Subject 5 retreated into the water, disappearing beneath the dark surface. The other creatures followed, leaving Sharon and me alone on the shore, shaken and overwhelmed by what had just transpired. As the adrenaline of the moment faded, the reality of our situation came crashing back. We were still deep underground, lost in a maze of caverns. Sharon's condition was deteriorating, and we had no idea how to get back to the surface. But we had been given a chance. A reprieve, however temporary. And with it, a monumental task to prove that humanity was worthy of existence alongside this new form of life we had created. As I helped Sharon to her feet, I knew that our journey was far from over. We had to find a way out of these caverns, back to civilization. And when we did, we would face an even greater challenge. How do you convince the world to change its ways when the alternative is extinction? The fate of our species now rested on our ability to evolve, not physically like Subject 5 and its kind, but morally, ethically, culturally. It was a daunting task, but as I looked at Sharon, seeing the determination in her eyes despite her condition, I felt a glimmer of hope. We had started this journey as scientists, seeking to unlock the secrets of evolution. Now, we would need to become something more. Ambassadors for humanity itself, fighting for our very right to exist in a world we had irrevocably changed. With a deep breath, I turned my flashlight towards the darkness ahead. "Come on," I said to Sharon. "We have a long way to go." Together, we took our first steps into an uncertain future, the weight of our species' fate heavy on our shoulders. Our journey through the caverns was a blur of darkness, pain, and desperate hope. Sharon's condition worsened with each passing hour, the alien DNA coursing through her veins, transforming her in ways I couldn't begin to understand. Yet she pressed on, her determination a beacon in the oppressive gloom. We followed the sound of rushing water, hoping it would lead us to the surface. The path was treacherous, filled with steep climbs and narrow ledges that tested our dwindling strength. All the while, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, shadowed by creatures born from our own ambition. After what felt like an eternity, we saw it, a faint glimmer of natural light. The cave mouth was high above us, a small opening in the cavern ceiling that promised freedom, but the wall was nearly vertical, a daunting climb even for someone in peak condition. "We can't give up now," Sharon wheezed, her eyes fever bright. "We have to warn them, David. We have to try to make things right." I nodded, steeling myself for the climb. Together then, one step at a time. The ascent was grueling. Our muscles screamed in protest, our fingers bloodied from gripping the sharp rock. Several times we nearly fell, saved only by desperate grabs at protruding stones. But inch by agonizing inch we climbed. As we neared the top, I heard a familiar growl from below. Subject 5 and its pack had found us. They watched our climb but made no move to stop us. I realized with a chill that this was another test. They were assessing our will to survive, our determination to fulfill the task they had set before us. With a final Herculean effort, we hauled ourselves out of the cave and into the blinding sunlight. We lay there on the forest floor, gasping and trembling, overwhelmed by the fresh air and the warmth of the sun on our skin. But our ordeal was far from over. We were miles from civilization, without food or water, and Sharon's condition was critical. As I helped her to her feet, I saw movement in the cave entrance below. Subject 5 emerged, its form adapting seamlessly to the surface environment. It fixed us with that unnervingly intelligent gaze one last time, a clear message in its eyes. We'll be watching. Then it was gone, vanishing into the forest with unnatural speed. The trek back to civilization was a nightmare of exhaustion and paranoia. Every snapping twig, every rustle in the underbrush, sent spikes of fear through me. When we finally stumbled onto a rural road and flagged down a passing truck, I almost couldn't believe we'd made it. The world we returned to was unchanged, blissfully unaware of the evolutionary time bomb ticking beneath the surface. Sharon was rushed to a hospital, where baffled doctors struggled to understand the changes racking her body. I was debriefed by stern-faced government officials who seemed more concerned with containment than comprehension. In the months that followed, I fought an uphill battle. I tried to convince world leaders of the threat we faced, the challenge laid before us by our own creation. Some dismissed me as a madman. Others saw only the military potential of what we had created, blind to the greater implications. Sharon's transformation stabilized, leaving her forever changed but alive. Her unique condition became proof of my claims, and slowly, too slowly, people began to listen. We formed a coalition of scientists, ethicists, and forward-thinking leaders. Our goal was monumental: to reshape human society, to prove that we could evolve beyond our destructive tendencies and coexist with the new form of life we had unleashed. It was a race against time. Every day brought reports of strange sightings, of animals behaving in impossible ways. Subject 5 and its kind were out there, watching, waiting, judging our progress. As I stand here now, years later, addressing the United Nations on the progress of our global initiative, I can't help but reflect on the journey that brought us here. The horrors we faced in those caverns, the impossible choice laid before us by our own creation. We have made strides. Renewable energy, sustainable agriculture, habitat restoration. Humanity has shown a capacity for change that gives me hope. But we have so far yet to go, and the watchful eyes of our evolutionary successors are ever present. The world now knows the truth, and every person on this planet understands the stakes. Our future is not guaranteed. We must earn our place in this new world, proving with every action that humanity deserves to exist alongside the new paradigm of life we have unleashed. As I conclude my speech, I catch a glimpse of movement outside the window. For a moment I see a form that doesn't quite fit, eyes that hold an intelligence beyond anything natural. Subject 5, or one of its kind, watching, always watching. Our greatest creation has become our judge, jury, and potential executioner. Every day is a test. Every action a statement of our worth as a species. The world has changed irrevocably, and we must change with it. This is humanity's greatest challenge, our final exam, and failure is not an option. My name is Talon Wexler, and the events I'm about to recount happened to me back in 2004, in the dense, shadowy backwoods of Oregon. I was 29 at the time, a freelance photographer with an insatiable appetite for capturing the raw beauty of nature through my lens. Home was a small town nestled in the heart of the state, one of those places where gossip traveled faster than light and everyone knew your business before you did. But I liked it that way. It was predictable, safe. I'd always been more comfortable behind my camera than in social situations. People were complicated, unpredictable. Landscapes, on the other hand, were constant, their beauty unwavering even in the harshest conditions. Maybe that's why I just ended things with my girlfriend of 3 years. She wanted more. More commitment, more of my time, more of me. But I couldn't give her what she needed. The breakup left me hollow, restless. I needed an escape, and work seemed like the perfect distraction. It was a crisp Saturday morning in late September when I started packing for a weekend trip to Crater Lake. The weather forecast promised clear skies, perfect conditions for the kind of moody, atmospheric shots I specialized in. As I loaded my gear into my battered Jeep Cherokee, a vehicle that had seen more back roads than highways, I felt a familiar thrill of anticipation. There's something about the promise of unexplored territory that never fails to get my blood pumping. But I wasn't going alone this time. My buddy Finn Walcott had agreed to join me. Finn was an ex-Marine, The kind of guy who could make you laugh even as he was teaching you a dozen ways to incapacitate an attacker with your bare hands. We'd met at a local bar a few years back, bonding over our shared love of the outdoors and a mutual disdain for small talk. Finn pulled up in his pickup just as I was securing my tripod. He hopped out, a grin plastered across his weathered face. "Ready for our little adventure into the wild, camera boy?" he called out, his voice carrying a hint of playful mockery. I rolled my eyes but couldn't suppress a smile. "As ready as I'll ever be. You bring the beer?" "What kind of question is that?" Finn retorted, hefting a cooler from his truck bed. "I also brought this," he added, patting the holster at his hip. "Just in case." I eyed the gun warily. "You really think we'll need that?" Finn shrugged, his expression turning serious for a moment. "You never know what you'll run into out there, Tall. Better to have it and not need it than need it and not have it." A chill ran down my spine at his words, but I brushed it off. We were going to Crater Lake, not some uncharted wilderness. What could possibly happen? As we finished loading up, I couldn't shake a nagging feeling in the pit of my stomach. It was probably just nerves, I told myself. After all, this was my first trip since the breakup. But as we pulled out of my driveway, the sun dipping below the horizon and casting long shadows across the road, I couldn't help but feel like we were driving towards something far more sinister than either of us could have imagined. The drive to Crater Lake was long but pleasant. We wound our way through dense forests, the trees pressing in close on either side of the road, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers. As night fell, the darkness seemed to deepen, swallowing up the world beyond our headlights. Finn kept up a steady stream of chatter, regaling me with stories from his military days. Some were hilarious, like the time he and his squad mates had to rescue a goat that had wandered into a minefield. Others were chilling, tales of close calls and lost comrades that made me grateful for my comparatively mundane life. "You ever feel like you're being watched out here?" Finn asked suddenly, his voice cutting through the darkness. I glanced at him, surprised by the question. "What do you mean?" He shrugged, his eyes scanning the tree line. "I don't know. Sometimes when I'm out in the woods, I get this feeling, like there's something out there, just beyond what I can see. Something watching, waiting." I laughed nervously. "Come on, man. Don't start with that Blair Witch stuff. You'll freak me out before we even get there." Finn chuckled, but it sounded forced. "Yeah, you're right. Just my imagination, I guess." We lapsed into silence after that, the only sound the steady hum of the engine and the crunch of gravel beneath our tires. I tried to focus on the road ahead, but Finn's words had planted a seed of unease in my mind. I found myself peering into the darkness beyond the windshield, half expecting to see a pair of glowing eyes staring back at me. By the time we reached the campsite, it was well past midnight. The moon hung low and full in the sky, casting an eerie silver light over the landscape. We set up camp quickly, our breath misting in the cold night air. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional hoot of an owl or the rustle of leaves in the breeze. As we sat around the campfire, nursing our beers, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were intruders here. The forest seemed to loom around us, watchful and ancient. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination working overtime, but the unease persisted. "You feel it too, don't you?" Finn's voice was low, barely audible over the crackle of the fire. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. "Something's not right here," he continued, his eyes scanning the darkness beyond our little circle of light. "I can't put my finger on it, but—" He trailed off, and we sat in silence for a long moment. Then, from somewhere in the depths of the forest came a sound that made my blood run cold. It was a howl, but unlike anything I'd ever heard before. It was too deep, too guttural to be a wolf, and it carried an almost human quality that sent shivers down my spine. Finn was on his feet in an instant, his hand on his holster. "What the hell was that?" he hissed. I shook my head, my heart pounding in my chest. "I don't know. Maybe we should—" But before I could finish, the howl came again, closer this time, and with it came the unmistakable sound of something large moving through the underbrush, heading straight for our camp. The crackling fire suddenly seemed feeble against the encroaching darkness. Finn and I stood back to back, our eyes straining to pierce the inky blackness beyond the flickering light. The forest had fallen eerily silent, as if holding its breath in anticipation. "Talon," Finn whispered, his voice taut with tension. When I give the word, I want you to slowly back towards the jeep. Don't run. Don't make any sudden movements. Just nice and easy, okay? I nodded, my throat too dry to speak. The weight of the camera around my neck, usually a comfort, now felt like an anchor, threatening to drag me down into the depths of my growing panic. We began to move, each step feeling like an eternity. The gravel crunched beneath our feet, the sound deafening in the unnatural silence. We were maybe halfway to the jeep when a twig snapped somewhere to our left. Finn's reaction was instantaneous. He whirled towards the sound, his gun appearing in his hand as if by magic. "Show yourself," he barked, his voice carrying the full authority of his military training. For a moment nothing happened. Then, slowly, a figure emerged from the tree line. In the dancing firelight, it was hard to make out details, but one thing was clear. Whatever this was, it wasn't human. It stood at least 7 feet tall, its body covered in matted fur that seemed to absorb the light. But it was the eyes that truly terrified me. They glowed with an otherworldly intelligence, fixing us with a predatory gaze that froze me to the spot. Finn fired a warning shot, the crack of the gun shattering the silence. The creature flinched but didn't retreat. Instead, it let out a low, rumbling growl that seemed to vibrate through the very ground beneath our feet. "Run," Finn yelled, firing again. This time, the bullet found its mark, and the creature roared in pain and anger. I didn't need to be told twice. I turned and sprinted for the jeep, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. Behind me, I could hear the sounds of a struggle. Finn's shouts, more gunshots, and that terrible inhuman roaring. I reached the jeep and fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip them. As I finally managed to unlock the door, I heard Finn cry out in pain. I turned to see him on the ground, the creature looming over him. Without thinking, I grabbed a heavy flashlight from the jeep and ran back towards them. "Hey," I yelled, my voice cracking with fear. The creature turned its glowing eyes on me, and for a moment I was paralyzed by pure primal terror. But then I saw Finn, bleeding and barely conscious, and something snapped inside me. I charged forward, swinging the flashlight with all my might. It connected with the creature's head with a sickening thud. The beast howled, a sound so filled with rage and pain that it would haunt my nightmares for years to come, and stumbled back. I used the moment of distraction to grab Finn, hauling him to his feet. Together we staggered back to the jeep. I could hear the creature recovering, its heavy footsteps pursuing us. We practically fell into the vehicle, and I gunned the engine, tires spinning in the loose gravel before finally finding purchase. As we sped away, I risked a glance in the rearview mirror. The creature stood at the edge of our abandoned campsite, its glowing eyes fixed on our retreating taillights. Then we rounded a bend, and it was lost from view. We drove in silence for what felt like hours, the adrenaline slowly ebbing from our systems. Finally, when the first hints of dawn were starting to lighten the sky, Finn spoke. What the hell was that thing?" His voice was weak, pain evident in every word. I shook my head, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. "I don't know. I've never seen anything like it." "We need to report this," Finn said, wincing as he shifted in his seat. "Whatever that was, it's dangerous. People need to know." I nodded, but a part of me already knew it wouldn't be that simple. Who would believe us? A photographer and an ex-Marine, claiming to have been attacked by some kind of monster in the woods. We'd be laughed out of town, as the sun rose, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold. I couldn't shake the feeling that our lives had irrevocably changed. The world suddenly seemed larger, darker, filled with secrets and dangers I'd never imagined. And somewhere out there, in the deep dark woods of Oregon, that creature was still waiting. The local sheriff's office was a small, unassuming building that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 1970s. As Finn and I walked in, the smell of stale coffee and old paperwork hit us like a wall. The deputy at the front desk looked up from his crossword puzzle, his eyebrows rising at the sight of us. I couldn't blame him. We must have looked a sight. Clothes torn and dirty, faces pale with exhaustion and lingering fear. Finn was leaning heavily on me, his makeshift bandage stained with dried blood. "Can I help you fellas?" the deputy asked, already reaching for the phone. "Probably to call for medical assistance." "We need to report an attack," I said. my voice sounding strange and distant to my own ears. Something. The deputy's hand paused over the phone. An animal attack? He asked, his tone skeptical. Bear, maybe. We've had a few problems with them lately. Finn shook his head, wincing at the movement. No bear. This was something else. Something I've never seen before. We spent the next hour recounting our story to increasingly dubious faces. As more officers gathered to listen, I could see the disbelief growing in their eyes. When we described the creature, its impossible size, its glowing eyes, its almost human-like qualities, I saw more than one officer exchange knowing looks. Finally, the sheriff himself came out to talk to us. He was a big man, with a handlebar mustache, and eyes that had seen too much to be easily shocked. He listened to our story without interruption, his face impassive. When we finished, he leaned back in his chair and sighed. Boys, he said, his voice gruff but not unkind, I appreciate you coming in to report this, but I think we all know what really happened here. I felt a surge of anger. What's that supposed to mean? The sheriff held up a placating hand. Now don't get riled up. I'm just saying, it was dark, you were in unfamiliar territory. Probably had a few beers. It's easy for the imagination to run wild. We weren't drunk, Finn growled, his own anger evident. We know what we saw. I'm sure you believe that, the sheriff said. But the fact is, there's no animal in these parts that matches your description. What you're talking about, well, it sounds more like something out of a horror movie than real life. I opened my mouth to argue, but the sheriff cut me off. Alex, I'll tell you what. I'll send a couple of deputies out to check your campsite. If they find anything unusual, we'll investigate further. In the meantime, why don't you boys head on home and get some rest? You've had a rough night by the looks of it. It was clear that the conversation was over. As we left the station, I could feel the weight of disbelieving stares on our backs. They think we're crazy, I muttered as we climbed into my Jeep. Finn nodded grimly. Or drunk, or high, or all of the above. Can't say I blame them. If I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, he trailed off, and we drove in silence for a while. The events of the night played on repeat in my mind, each replay only serving to deepen my confusion and fear. What do we do now? I asked finally, as we pulled up outside Finn's house. He was quiet for a long moment, his eyes distant. We wait, he said at last. We wait and we watch, and we prepare. Because if that thing is still out there, it's only a matter of time before it strikes again. As I watched Finn limp into his house, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Something had awakened in the forests of Oregon. Something ancient and terrible. And whether anyone believed us or not, Finn and I were now on the front lines of a war we never asked to fight. I drove home in a daze, the familiar streets of our small town suddenly seeming alien and threatening. Every shadow held potential danger. Every rustle of leaves sent my heart racing. By the time I reached my apartment, I was a nervous wreck. I spent the next few days in a state of hypervigilance, jumping at every unexpected sound, peering out my windows at the slightest provocation. I tried to lose myself in my work, sorting through the photos I'd taken on previous trips, but I couldn't focus. Every landscape shot now seemed to hold hidden threats, dark shapes lurking just out of frame. Finn and I spoke daily, comparing notes and theories. The deputies had indeed checked out our campsite, but as we'd feared, they found nothing out of the ordinary. No strange tracks, no signs of a struggle, nothing to corroborate our fantastic story. They think we staged it, Finn told me over the phone, his voice tight with frustration. Can you believe that? Like we'd tear up our own campsite and injure ourselves for some sort of prank. I could believe it, actually. It was easier to accept that we were lying or delusional than to face the possibility that something truly inexplicable was lurking in the woods. But I knew what I had seen, what I had felt. The terror had been too real, too visceral to be a product of imagination or intoxication. As the days turned into weeks, life in our small town slowly returned to normal. People stopped whispering about us when we walked by, the story of our drunken hallucination fading into just another piece of local gossip. But Finn and I couldn't let it go. We spent our evenings poring over local legends, searching for any mention of a creature that matched what we had seen. It was during one of these research sessions that Finn stumbled upon something intriguing. Look at this, he said, pushing an old leather-bound book across the table to me. The page was yellowed with age, the ink faded, but I could make out a crude drawing that made my blood run cold. It depicted a tall, fur-covered creature with glowing eyes, standing upright like a man. "Where did you find this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Local history section of the library," Finn replied. "It's a collection of Native American legends from this area. They call this thing the Night Walker. According to the stories, it's been haunting these woods for centuries." I traced the outline of the creature with a trembling finger. "This is it, Finn. This is what we saw." He nodded grimly. "Keep reading." The legend spoke of a beast that walked between the world of men and the spirit realm, a creature of insatiable hunger that preyed on those who ventured too deep into its territory. The description matched our experience with chilling accuracy. The glowing eyes, the inhuman strength, the blood-curdling howl. "We have to go back," Finn said suddenly. I looked at him like he'd lost his mind. "Go back? Are you insane? That thing nearly killed us." "Exactly," Finn replied, his eyes burning with a determination I hadn't seen since our encounter. "It's still out there, Tal, and if we don't do something about it, someone else is going to get hurt, or worse." I wanted to argue, to tell him he was crazy, but deep down I knew he was right. We had seen this thing, we had survived it. That made it our responsibility. "What's your plan?" I asked, already knowing I was going to regret this. Finn's plan, as it turned out, was as simple as it was dangerous. We would return to Crater Lake, set up camp in the same spot, and wait for the creature to come to us. This time we would be prepared. The next few weeks were a flurry of preparation. Finn called in some favors from his military days, acquiring equipment that I'm pretty sure wasn't strictly legal for civilians to own. I focused on researching, digging deeper into the legend of the Night Walker, looking for any weakness we could exploit. As the day of our return approached, I found myself oscillating between terror and a grim sort of excitement. Part of me was screaming to back out, to forget this insane plan and try to move on with my life. But another part, a part I hadn't known existed before that night in the woods, was eager for the confrontation. I wanted answers, and more than that, I wanted revenge for the fear that had haunted my every waking moment since our encounter. The drive back to Crater Lake was tense. The car laden with enough firepower to start a small war. We barely spoke, each lost in our own thoughts, our own fears. As we set up camp in the fading light, the forest seemed to close in around us, watchful and malevolent. "You remember the plan?" Finn asked as we finished our preparations. I nodded, running through it in my mind one more time. We would take shifts throughout the night, one sleeping while the other kept watch. At the first sign of the creature, we would trigger the flares we had set up around the perimeter of our camp, illuminating the area and hopefully disorienting the beast. Then, we would hit it with everything we had. As darkness fell, we took our positions. Finn took the first watch while I tried to get some rest, but sleep eluded me. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig had me sitting bolt upright, my heart pounding. It was just past midnight when it happened. I was on watch, my eyes straining against the darkness when I heard it. That same bone-chilling howl that had haunted my nightmares for weeks. "Finn," I hissed, shaking him awake. "It's here." He was on his feet in an instant, rifle in hand. We stood back to back, scanning the tree line. The forest had gone deathly quiet, that same unnatural silence we had experienced before. Then, we saw it. A pair of glowing eyes, floating in the darkness at the edge of our camp. They were fixed on us, filled with an intelligence and malevolence that froze the breath in my lungs. "Now," Finn yelled, and I triggered the flares. The night exploded into blinding light and chaos. The world erupted into a hellish tableau of light and shadow as the flares ignited, bathing the forest in a harsh, unnatural glow. For a moment, everything seemed suspended in time. The trees cast long, writhing shadows that danced across the ground, and the air itself seemed to vibrate with tension. And there, caught in the sudden illumination, stood our nightmare-made flesh. The creature was even more terrifying than I remembered. In the flickering light of the flares, I could see details that had been mercifully obscured during our first encounter. Its body was a mass of corded muscle beneath matted fur, with long, wickedly curved claws that looked capable of rending flesh from bone with horrifying ease. But it was the face that truly chilled me to my core. It was a twisted amalgamation of human and beast, with a protruding snout filled with yellowed razor-sharp teeth, and those eyes, those terrible glowing eyes that seemed to burn with an otherworldly hunger. For a heartbeat we all stood frozen, Finn and I, our weapons raised, and the creature momentarily stunned by the sudden light. Then, with a roar that seemed to shake the very ground beneath our feet, it charged. "Fire!" Finn yelled, and we opened up with everything we had. The sound was deafening, a wall of noise that drowned out everything else. Muzzle flashes lit up the night like strobes, and I could smell the acrid scent of gunpowder mixing with the pine-scented air. But the creature kept coming. Our bullets seemed to have little effect, tearing chunks of fur and flesh from its body but doing nothing to slow its advance. In seconds it was upon us. I felt rather than saw its claws slash through the air where my head had been a moment before. I stumbled backwards, tripping over a root and falling hard onto my back. The impact drove the air from my lungs, and I lay there, gasping, certain that my next sight would be those terrible jaws closing around my throat. But Finn was there, emptying his magazine into the creature's chest at point-blank range. The beast howled in pain and fury, turning its attention to this new threat. I watched in horror as it backhanded Finn, sending him flying across the clearing to crash into a tree with a sickening thud. "Finn," I screamed, struggling to my feet. The creature turned back to me, its eyes blazing with murderous intent. I raised my rifle, knowing it was empty but unable to think of anything else to do. And then, just as the beast was about to pounce, something extraordinary happened. A beam of moonlight broke through the canopy, falling directly onto the creature. It recoiled as if struck, letting out a high-pitched keening sound that set my teeth on edge. In that moment of distraction, I remembered the flare gun strapped to my hip. With shaking hands, I drew it and fired directly into the creature's face. The effect was instantaneous and horrifying. The beast's fur caught fire, and it howled in agony, clawing at its burning face. The stench of burning hair and flesh filled the air, making me gag. The creature thrashed about, its movements becoming increasingly frantic and uncoordinated. And then, as suddenly as it had appeared, it was gone, crashing off into the underbrush, leaving a trail of fire and destruction in its wake. For a long moment I stood there, the smoking flare gun still clutched in my trembling hand. Then, remembering Finn, I rushed to where he lay crumpled at the base of the tree. "Finn," I called, dropping to my knees beside him. "Finn, can you hear me?" To my immense relief, he groaned, his eyes fluttering open. "Did we get it?" He mumbled, his words slurred. I helped him sit up, checking him for injuries. He had a nasty gash on his forehead, and I was worried about internal injuries, but he was alive. "I don't know," I answered truthfully. "I hit it with a flare. It ran off into the woods." Finn nodded, wincing at the movement. "We need to go after it," he said, trying to stand. "Finish this." I pushed him back down gently. "You're in no condition to go anywhere," I said firmly. "We need to get you to a hospital." He started to argue, but a spasm of pain cut him off. I took advantage of his momentary silence to help him to his feet and half carry, half drag him to the jeep. As I drove us out of the forest, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had just scraped the surface of something much bigger and more terrifying than we could have imagined. The creature was still out there, wounded but alive, and something told me that it wasn't going to forgive or forget what we had done. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. The days following our second encounter with the creature were a blur of hospital visits, police interviews, and sleepless nights. Finn had suffered a concussion and several cracked ribs, but the doctors assured us he would make a full recovery. The local authorities were less than pleased with our reckless vigilantism, as they called it, but with no real evidence of wrongdoing beyond some illegally modified weapons, they were forced to let us go with a stern warning. But I couldn't shake the feeling that we had stirred up something that wasn't going to simply go away. Every shadow seemed to hide a lurking threat. Every unexpected sound sent my heart racing. I found myself jumping at the slightest provocation, my nerves frayed to the breaking point. It was Finn who suggested we needed help. "We can't do this alone, Tal," he said during one of my visits to the hospital. "We need someone who knows what they're doing, someone who can make sense of all this." That's how we found ourselves, a week later, sitting in the cluttered office of Dr. Eleanor Blackwood, professor of folklore and mythology at the local community college. She was a small bird-like woman with sharp eyes that seemed to look right through you, and a no-nonsense attitude that brooked no argument. "So," she said, peering at us over the rim of her glasses, "you believe you've encountered the Nightwalker?" It wasn't a question, but I nodded anyway. "We've seen it twice now," I said, my voice hoarse. "Nearly killed us both times." Dr. Blackwood leaned back in her chair, her expression unreadable. "The Nightwalker is one of the oldest legends in this area," she said slowly. "The native tribes spoke of it in whispers, a creature that walked between worlds, feeding on the fear and flesh of the living." She stood abruptly, moving to a large bookshelf that dominated one wall of her office. After a moment of searching, she pulled out a large leather-bound tome. "This is one of the oldest accounts of the Nightwalker," she said, laying the book on her desk and opening it to a marked page. The illustration that greeted us was chillingly familiar. The same beast we had encountered, rendered in faded ink and yellowed parchment. But it was the text beside it that caught my attention. "The Nightwalker fears the light of the full moon." I read aloud, my mind racing back to that moment in the forest when the creature had recoiled from the moonbeam. "It can be wounded by fire and silver." Dr. Blackwood nodded gravely. "The legends say that the Nightwalker was once a man, a shaman who sought power beyond mortal ken. He performed a ritual during a lunar eclipse, trying to harness the power of the Shadow Realm. But something went wrong. He was transformed," Finn said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," Dr. Blackwood confirmed. "Transformed into a creature of shadow and hunger, forever caught between the world of the living and the realm of spirits. The full moon reminds it of its lost humanity, causes it pain, and fire and silver are elements of purification in many cultures, anathema to creatures of darkness." I felt a chill run down my spine. "So how do we stop it?" I asked, dreading the answer. Dr. Blackwood's eyes met mine, and I saw a mixture of fear and determination in them. "The legend speaks of a ritual," she said slowly. "A way to banish the Nightwalker back to the Shadow Realm. But it's dangerous, and it must be performed at the site of the original transformation." "Where's that?" Finn asked, leaning forward. Dr. Blackwood shook her head. "That's the problem. The location has been lost to time. All we know is that it's somewhere deep in the forests around Crater Lake." I exchanged a look with Finn, seeing my own resolve mirrored in his eyes. "Then we'll find it," I said, surprised by the strength in my own voice. Dr. Blackwood regarded us for a long moment, then nodded. "I'll help you," she said. "But understand this. What we're dealing with is beyond anything you've faced before. The Nightwalker is not just a physical threat but a spiritual one. It feeds on fear, grows stronger with every life it takes, and it's been feeding for a very long time." As we left Dr. Blackwood's office, laden with books and notes, I felt a strange mix of fear and exhilaration. We had a purpose now, a goal beyond mere survival. But the weight of what we were undertaking pressed down on me like a physical thing. We were going to hunt a monster, a creature out of nightmare and legend. And if we failed, it wouldn't just be our lives on the line, but potentially those of everyone in the surrounding area. The Nightwalker had been awakened, its hunger renewed. And I had a sinking feeling that it was just getting started. That night, as I tried to sleep, I was plagued by vivid, terrifying dreams. I saw the creature stalking through moonlit forests, its eyes gleaming with malevolent hunger. I heard the screams of its victims, felt the terror of those hunted through the darkness, and underlying it all was a sense of ancient, patient evil, a malevolence that had waited centuries for this moment. I woke in a cold sweat, the echoes of those nightmare screams still ringing in my ears. As I stumbled to the bathroom to splash cold water on my face, I caught a glimpse of movement in my bedroom mirror. For a heart-stopping moment, I thought I saw a pair of glowing eyes watching me from the shadows. But when I whirled around, there was nothing there. Just the familiar contours of my room, bathed in the pale light of the waning moon. Yet as I stood there, heart pounding, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just glimpsed the true nature of what we were up against. This wasn't just a hunt. It was a war against a creature that had been playing this game for centuries, that knew the darkness in ways we could never comprehend. And as I stared out my window at the forest that surrounded our town, I wondered if we had any hope of winning. But we had to try, because if we didn't, who would? The Nightwalker was out there, growing stronger with each passing night. and it was up to us to stop it, no matter the cost. The weeks that followed were a blur of research, preparation, and increasingly disturbing revelations. Dr. Blackwood proved to be an invaluable ally, her knowledge of folklore and mythology providing crucial insights into the nature of the Nightwalker and the ritual needed to banish it. We pored over old maps, cross-referencing them with local legends and historical accounts. Slowly, painfully, we began to narrow down the possible locations for the site of the original ritual. It was grueling work, made all the more urgent by the growing reports of strange sightings and unexplained disappearances in the forests around Crater Lake. "It's getting bolder," Finn said grimly one evening, as we sat surrounded by maps and ancient texts in my living room. 3 hikers gone missing in the last week alone. The local authorities are baffled." I nodded, a cold knot of dread forming in my stomach. We both knew what was really happening to those poor souls, but we couldn't tell anyone. Who would believe us? Dr. Blackwood entered the room, her arms laden with yet more books. "I think I've found something," she said, her eyes bright with excitement and fear. She laid an old, crumbling map on the table. "Look here," she pointed to a spot deep in the forest, marked with a strange symbol. "This matches the description in the oldest account of the Nightwalker's creation. A cave system, hidden in a valley that's only accessible during the new moon." Finn leaned in, studying the map intently. "That's not far from where we had our first encounter," he mused. "How did we miss it?" "The entrance is hidden," Dr. Blackwood explained. "According to the legend, it only reveals itself in total darkness. That's why the ritual has to be performed during the new moon." I felt a chill run down my spine. "So we have to go in there in complete darkness to face this thing?" Dr. Blackwood nodded solemnly. "I'm afraid so. The ritual requires the blood of those who have faced the Nightwalker and survived, freely given at the site of its creation. That's you two." The implications of her words hung heavy in the air. We would be walking into the lair of a monster, essentially offering ourselves as bait. The fear must have shown on my face, because Finn reached out and gripped my shoulder. "We can do this, Tal," he said, his voice steady and reassuring. "We have to." I took a deep breath, steeling myself. "When's the next new moon?" 3 days from now, Dr. Blackwood replied. "We need to be ready." The next 3 days were a whirlwind of preparation. We gathered supplies, studied the ritual until we could recite it in our sleep, and tried to prepare ourselves mentally for what we were about to face. But how does one truly prepare to confront a creature out of nightmare? The night of the new moon arrived all too soon. We set out just after sunset, our backpacks heavy with equipment and our hearts heavy with the weight of what we were about to attempt. Dr. Blackwood came with us, her knowledge of the ritual essential to our success. The forest seemed different that night, more alive somehow. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig felt deliberate, menacing. The darkness pressed in around us, thick and oppressive, swallowing the beams of our flashlights. We hiked for hours, following the old map and Dr. Blackwood's directions. As midnight approached, we found ourselves in a small, secluded valley. The trees here were ancient, their gnarled branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. "This is it," Dr. Blackwood whispered, her voice tight with tension. "The cave should be around here somewhere." We spread out, searching the rocky outcroppings that dotted the valley floor. It was Finn who found it, his excited shout breaking the eerie silence. "Over here," he called. "I think I've found the entrance." We hurried over to where he stood, staring at what appeared to be a solid rock face. But as we watched, the faint moonlight faded completely, plunging us into total darkness. And there, revealed in the absence of light, was the mouth of a cave, glowing with a faint otherworldly phosphorescence. "Well," I said, my mouth dry, "I guess that answers the question of whether we're in the right place." Dr. Blackwood began setting up for the ritual, laying out candles and drawing arcane symbols on the ground. Finn and I checked our weapons, silver-tipped bullets, blessed by a local shaman at Dr. Blackwood's insistence, and flare guns loaded with magnesium flares. As we prepared to enter the cave, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The back of my neck prickled, and I found myself constantly glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see those terrible glowing eyes emerging from the darkness. "Remember," Dr. Blackwood said as we stood at the cave mouth, "the ritual must be performed in the heart of the cave system. That's where the barrier between our world and the Shadow Realm is thinnest. And be careful. The Nightwalker will sense your presence. It will try to stop you. Finn nodded grimly. We're ready, he said, though I could hear the slight tremor in his voice. With one last look at the star-studded sky above, we stepped into the cave. The phosphorescent glow provided just enough light to see by, casting everything in an eerie blue-green hue. The air was thick and damp, with an underlying scent of decay that made my stomach churn. We moved slowly, every sense on high alert. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the sound of our breathing and the occasional drip of water. As we delved deeper into the earth, the cave began to change. The walls became smoother, almost polished, and strange symbols began to appear, carved into the rock and glowing with the same phosphorescent light. These are ancient, Dr. Blackwood murmured, running her fingers over one of the symbols. Older than any language I've ever seen. Suddenly a bone-chilling howl echoed through the cave system. We froze, our hearts pounding. The sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, reverberating off the walls and filling the air with its terrible cry. It knows we're here, Finn said, his voice barely above a whisper. As if in response, the shadows around us seemed to deepen, to move with a life of their own. I watched in horror as they began to coalesce, taking on a familiar, terrifying form. The Nightwalker had found us, and we were trapped in its domain, with nowhere to run and nowhere to hide. The final confrontation was upon us, and I knew with chilling certainty that not all of us would be leaving this cave alive. The Nightwalker materialized before us, its form even more terrifying in the eerie glow of the cave. Its eyes burned with an unholy fire, fixed upon us with predatory intensity. The air grew thick with the stench of decay, and something else, something old and wrong that made my skin crawl. Now, Finn yelled, raising his weapon. We opened fire simultaneously, the muzzle flashes momentarily blinding in the dim light. The creature roared in pain and anger as the silver bullets tore into its flesh, but it didn't fall. Instead, it charged. I dove to the side, feeling the rush of air as massive claws slashed through the space where I'd been standing. Dr. Blackwood was chanting, her voice rising above the chaos as she began the ritual. Finn and I had to keep the Nightwalker distracted, had to buy her enough time to complete the incantation. The battle that followed was a nightmare of flashing claws, gnashing teeth, and desperate gunfire. The confined space of the cave worked against us, limiting our mobility while the Nightwalker seemed to meld with the shadows themselves, appearing and disappearing at will. I felt a searing pain across my back as the creature's claws found their mark, tearing through my jacket and into flesh. The warm trickle of blood down my spine only seemed to enrage the beast further, its attacks becoming more frenzied. Finn was a blur of motion, his military training evident in every move. But even he was being worn down, his reactions slowing as exhaustion and injury took their toll. We were losing, and we both knew it. In desperation, I reached for my flare gun. Finn, eyes, I yelled before firing directly at the Nightwalker's face. The cave erupted in blinding, magnesium-bright light. The creature's howl of pain was deafening, echoing off the walls and reverberating through our bodies. For a moment, I thought we'd won. The Nightwalker staggered back, clawing at its burning face. But then, with terrifying speed, it lunged forward. I heard Finn's shout of warning, felt his hand shoving me aside, and then I watched in horror as the Nightwalker's claws sank deep into my friend's chest. "No!" I screamed, my voice lost in the creature's triumphant roar. Finn's eyes met mine, wide with pain and fear before he crumpled to the ground. Something snapped inside me then. Rage pure and hot flooded my veins. I emptied my gun into the Nightwalker's body, driving it back step by step. When I ran out of bullets, I drew my hunting knife, the silver blade gleaming in the phosphorescent light. I charged, no longer caring about my own safety. The creature, surprised by my sudden aggression, hesitated for a crucial moment. My blade sank deep into its side, and I felt a savage satisfaction at its howl of pain. But my victory was short-lived. With a swipe of its massive arm, the Nightwalker sent me flying across the cave. I hit the wall hard, the impact driving the air from my lungs. As I struggled to my feet, I saw the creature advancing on Dr. Blackwood, who was still chanting, her voice growing more urgent. I knew then that this was it. Our last chance. With the last of my strength, I staggered towards Finn's motionless form. His blood was pooling on the cave floor, and I knew what I had to do. "Hey!" I yelled, my voice hoarse. The Nightwalker turned, its glowing eyes fixing on me. I stood over Finn, my hand coated in his blood. "You want blood?" I snarled. "Come and get it." As the creature charged, I smeared Finn's blood across the symbols Dr. Blackwood had drawn earlier. The effect was instantaneous. The cave began to shake, the symbols lighting up one by one. The Nightwalker howled, but this time it was a sound of fear rather than rage. Dr. Blackwood's chant reached a crescendo, the words seeming to take on a life of their own. The air crackled with energy, and I watched in awe and terror as a rift began to open in the very fabric of reality. The Nightwalker thrashed and howled, clawing at the ground as an unseen force began to pull it towards the rift. Its eyes, once filled with malevolent hunger, now shone with very human fear. For a moment, I almost pitied it. But then I looked at Finn's broken body, at the blood on my hands, and my resolve hardened. This ended now. With a final earth-shattering roar, the Nightwalker was pulled into the rift. There was a blinding flash of light, a sound like reality itself tearing, and then silence. The rift closed as suddenly as it had appeared, leaving no trace of its existence. The cave was plunged into darkness, the phosphorescent glow extinguished. In the beam of my flickering flashlight, I crawled to Finn's side. His breathing was shallow, his skin pale, but he was alive. Dr. Blackwood joined me, her hands shaking as she helped me bandage his wounds. "Is it over?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Blackwood nodded, exhaustion etched in every line of her face. "It's over," she confirmed. "The Nightwalker has been banished back to the Shadow Realm. It won't trouble our world again." As we waited for the rescue team, summoned by the emergency beacon we'd activated, I found myself staring at the spot where the rift had been. We had won, but at what cost? And could we ever truly go back to our normal lives after what we'd experienced? The Nightwalker was gone, but I knew its memory would haunt me for the rest of my days. The darkness would never again be just darkness. It would forever hold the potential for unspeakable horrors. But we had faced those horrors, and we had survived. That, I supposed, would have to be enough. The weeks following our confrontation with the Nightwalker passed in a blur of hospital visits, police interviews, and sleepless nights. Finn's recovery was slow but steady, his wounds gradually healing even as the mental scars remained raw and painful for all of us. The official story, carefully crafted with the help of Dr. Blackwood's academic reputation, was that we had stumbled upon a dangerous cult operating in the forests around Crater Lake. It was a tale filled with half-truths and carefully worded omissions, but it was enough to satisfy the authorities and explain away the violence and strangeness of that night. But the truth was a burden we three alone would bear. I found myself jumping at shadows, startling at every unexpected sound. Sleep became a luxury, my nights plagued by vivid nightmares of glowing eyes and blood-stained claws. I knew Finn and Dr. Blackwood were struggling too, each of us grappling with the reality of what we had seen and done in our own ways. It was a month after that fateful night when Dr. Blackwood called us to her office. Her face was grave as she gestured for us to sit. "I've been doing more research," she began without preamble, "about the Nightwalker and other things." I felt a chill run down my spine. "What do you mean, other things?" I asked, not sure I wanted to hear the answer. Dr. Blackwood sighed, suddenly looking much older than her years. "The Nightwalker. It wasn't unique. There are other creatures out there, other horrors lurking in the dark corners of our world. What we faced, it was just the beginning." Finn leaned forward, his face pale. "Are you saying there are more of these things?" "Not exactly like the Nightwalker," Dr. Blackwood clarified, "but similar in nature. Ancient, powerful beings that most of humanity has forgotten or chosen to ignore. And now that we've awakened to their existence..." She trailed off, but I understood the implication. We had crossed a threshold, pulled back a veil that could never be lowered again. We now stood as unwitting guardians against horrors most people couldn't even imagine. "So what do we do?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. Dr. Blackwood met my eyes, and I saw in them a mixture of fear and determination. "We prepare," she said simply. We study, we train, and we stand ready, because if we don't, who will? As I left her office that day, I felt the weight of our new reality settling onto my shoulders. The world suddenly seemed larger, darker, filled with shadows that might hide unimaginable terrors. But it was also a world that needed protecting, even if most of its inhabitants would never know the dangers that lurked just out of sight. I thought of my camera, gathering dust on a shelf at home. I had always used it to capture the beauty of the world, but now I realized it could serve a new purpose. It could be a tool to document the darkness, to gather evidence of the horrors we might face. That night, as I stood at my window looking out at the forest that had once seemed so familiar, I made a decision. I would not let fear rule me. I would not hide from the darkness. Instead, I would face it head on, camera in hand, ready to shine a light into the shadows and reveal the truth, no matter how terrifying it might be. The Night Walker was gone, but our fight was far from over. It was just the beginning of a new chapter, a journey into a world of shadow and mystery that few would ever know existed. And as I watched the sun set over the trees, painting the sky in hues of red and gold, I knew that whatever came next, we would face it together. Because in the end, that's all we have. Each other, and the courage to stand against the darkness, no matter the cost. The beast of Crater Lake may have been banished, but its legacy lived on in us. And as long as we drew breath, we would ensure that the nightmares remained where they belonged, in the shadows, never again to threaten the light of our world.